Blood trickled down Jamal Washington's chin as the flight attendant stood over him, fist still clenched. The cabin froze in shock. Nobody expected what happened next, a silver-haired black man rising from seat 14A, revealing his federal judge credentials. That boy's jaw is broken, and so is your career. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If this kind of injustice makes your blood boil, hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on stories where justice prevails against all odds. Now let's find out how a routine flight turned into a nightmare for young Jamal Washington. 15-year-old Jamal Washington couldn't contain his excitement as he walked through the Detroit Metropolitan Airport. This was his first time traveling alone, and the journey to Atlanta to visit his grandmother represented a small but significant taste of independence. As the captain of his high school debate team and recipient of a prestigious academic scholarship, Jamal had always been mature for his age. His dream of becoming a lawyer seemed more attainable with each academic achievement. Remember what I told you, his mother Keisha had instructed as she dropped him off at the airport. A hard-working nurse at Detroit General Hospital, she had raised Jamal alone since he was 8 years old. Be respectful, follow instructions, and don't give anyone a reason to single you out. You know how it is. Jamal knew exactly what she meant. As a young black male, he had been taught the unwritten rules of navigating a world that often viewed him with suspicion before he even opened his mouth. Walking through the terminal, he maintained perfect posture, kept his hands visible, and spoke with deliberate clarity when checking in. When boarding time arrived, Jamal observed the first-class passengers, predominantly white business travelers in tailored suits, board before him. He waited patiently for his zone to be called, ticket clutched firmly in hand. Once on the plane, Jamal located his seat in economy class, 23C, an aisle seat. As he approached, he noticed an older white couple already seated in the window and middle positions. The woman glanced up, then whispered something to her husband. Both shifted slightly toward the window, creating additional space between them and his assigned seat. "Excuse me," Jamal said politely. "I believe that's my seat." The couple nodded without making eye contact, and Jamal carefully maneuvered into his spot without touching them, acutely aware of their discomfort. A flight attendant named Bryce Reynolds passed by, offering pre-flight beverages to select passengers. Jamal noticed how Bryce's demeanor changed depending on who he addressed. To the white passengers across the aisle, his tone was warm and accommodating. "Can I get you anything before takeoff? Water? Coffee?" But when he reached Jamal's row, he simply passed by without acknowledgement. Several rows ahead in seat 14A sat an older black man who had boarded early. Distinguished-looking with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, he wore a tailored suit that spoke of authority and success. This was Judge Marcus Hamilton, though Jamal had no way of knowing it yet. The federal judge had noticed the subtle shift in the couple's body language when Jamal approached and observed Bryce's selective customer service with a practiced eye. He'd seen such behavior countless times throughout his 30-year career in law. With a slight frown, he made a mental note before returning to the brief he was reviewing. As the final passengers boarded, Jamal overheard fragments of conversation between Bryce and another flight attendant. "Got a full flight today," the other attendant remarked. "Yeah, and I'm already keeping an eye on a few," Bryce responded quietly, with a meaningful glance toward Jamal's section. The cabin doors closed, and the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, welcoming everyone aboard the 3-hour flight to Atlanta. Jamal fastened his seatbelt, unaware that this routine journey was about to become anything but ordinary. The first hour of the flight passed uneventfully as the aircraft reached cruising altitude. Jamal had brought homework to complete during the journey, an essay for his AP English class, but found it difficult to concentrate. The air in the cabin felt increasingly stuffy, and his throat had become uncomfortably dry. When the drink service began, Jamal waited patiently for Bryce to reach his row. He watched as the flight attendant methodically worked his way down the aisle, serving each passenger with mechanical efficiency. However, Jamal couldn't help but notice the subtle differences in Bryce's interactions. With white passengers, there were smiles, jokes, and questions about whether they needed anything else. When he finally reached Jamal's row, he served the elderly couple first. "What can I get for you today?" Bryce asked them warmly. After serving them both ginger ale with extra ice as requested, he simply moved to the next row without acknowledging Jamal. "Excuse me," Jamal said politely, raising his hand slightly. "Could I get some water, please?" Bryce turned back, his smile vanishing. "I'll get back to you," he replied curtly before continuing down the aisle. 15 minutes passed. Jamal waited patiently, assuming Bryce would return as promised. The drink cart was eventually stowed away, and still, no water had appeared. The elderly woman beside him had noticed and appeared uncomfortable but said nothing. After waiting another 10 minutes, Jamal's thirst became too much to bear. He pressed the call button above his seat. 5 minutes passed with no response. He pressed it again. Finally, Bryce appeared, looking irritated. "Is there an emergency?" he asked loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "No emergency, sir," Jamal responded calmly. "I just wanted to ask for some water." "I think you missed me during the service." "I didn't miss anyone," Bryce replied. "We're experiencing turbulence, so the drink service is suspended. You'll have to wait." Jamal glanced around, confused. The seatbelt sign was off, and the flight seemed perfectly smooth. Other passengers were freely moving about the cabin. "I understand," Jamal replied. "Could you let me know when I might be able to get some water?" "When I have time," Bryce responded before walking away again. In seat 14A, Judge Hamilton had observed the entire exchange. Discreetly, he pulled out his phone and sent a text message to a colleague on the Civil Rights Commission, making note of the flight number, date, and Bryce's name tag. After another 30 minutes without water, Jamal decided he would at least use the restroom. He carefully unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up, making sure not to disturb his seatmates. As he made his way down the narrow aisle, he was cautious to avoid touching any other passengers. Just as he approached the lavatory, Bryce emerged from the galley carrying a tray of drinks for first-class passengers. Despite the ample space for both of them to pass, Bryce made no effort to adjust his path. Instead, he continued forward, bumping hard into Jamal's shoulder. The collision sent several drinks spilling onto nearby passengers, a middle-aged white couple who immediately cried out in surprise. "I am so sorry." Bryce immediately apologized to the couple, his voice filled with concern. Then, his demeanor shifting dramatically, he turned to Jamal. "Why don't you watch where you're going?" he snapped. "I was watching, sir," Jamal replied, stunned by the accusation. "I was staying to my side of the aisle." "This young man deliberately bumped into me," Bryce announced loudly to the surrounding passengers. "He's been disruptive since boarding." Several passengers began giving Jamal hostile looks. The narrative was taking hold, a troublemaking teenager causing problems on the flight. "That's not true," Jamal protested, his voice remaining measured despite his rising anxiety. "I was just trying to use the restroom." "Don't talk back to me," Bryce warned. "Return to your seat immediately before you cause any more problems." "But I still need to." "Now," Bryce interrupted, "or I'll have to report your aggressive behavior to the captain." From several rows ahead, Judge Hamilton had witnessed the entire incident. He'd seen clearly that Bryce had deliberately moved into Jamal's path. The judge removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose in growing concern. He had seen this pattern too many times in his career, the fabrication of a threat where none existed, the public humiliation designed to establish control, the creation of a narrative that would justify increasingly harsh treatment. As Jamal made his way back to his seat, cheeks burning with humiliation and eyes downcast to avoid the judgmental stares of other passengers, an elderly white woman spoke up. "That wasn't right," she said loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "The boy didn't do anything wrong." "Ma'am, please stay out of this," Bryce replied dismissively. "We're trained to handle these situations." The woman shook her head but fell silent, intimidated by the authority in his voice. Jamal slid back into his seat, his throat still parched, his dignity wounded. He fought back tears, remembering his mother's advice never to show emotion in public spaces where it could be misconstrued. He pulled out his textbook again, trying to focus on the words through increasingly blurry vision. In seat 14A, Judge Marcus Hamilton quietly activated the recording feature on his phone. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing expected turbulence ahead. "Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin. All passengers, please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." The seatbelt sign illuminated with a soft ding. Jamal, still shaken from the earlier confrontation, immediately reached for his seatbelt. He pulled the metal ends together, but the buckle wouldn't click. He tried again, applying more pressure, but something was wrong with the mechanism. After several attempts, it became clear that the seatbelt was malfunctioning. Jamal glanced around nervously. The last thing he wanted was another interaction with Bryce, but safety protocols required him to be buckled during turbulence. He reluctantly pressed the call button. Moments later, Bryce appeared, visibly irritated. "What now?" he demanded. "I'm sorry to bother you, sir," Jamal explained, "but my seatbelt seems to be broken. It won't latch properly." Instead of helping, Bryce's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Everyone else managed to fasten their seatbelts without issues," he said loudly, drawing attention from nearby passengers. "Why are you the only one having problems?" "I don't know, sir," Jamal replied, his voice steady despite his growing discomfort. "It just won't click together." "Show me," Bryce demanded. Jamal demonstrated, trying to connect the metal pieces, which refused to lock. "You're not doing it correctly," Bryce announced, making no move to assist. "Are you deliberately being difficult?" "No, sir," Jamal insisted. "I've tried multiple times. I think it's actually broken." The plane hit a patch of turbulence, causing a slight jolt. Bryce grabbed the back of the seat to steady himself. "We're experiencing turbulence," as announced, he said sternly. "And you're sitting here unbuckled, endangering yourself and potentially others if you become a projectile." "That's why I called for help," Jamal explained, growing increasingly anxious. "I can't get it to work." "This is becoming a safety issue," Bryce declared, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I'm going to need you to move to the back of the aircraft where we can properly secure you." Jamal felt a chill run through him. Being singled out and moved to the back of the plane felt deeply wrong, reminiscent of historical segregation his grandmother had told him about. "I don't understand why I need to move," Jamal said carefully. "Couldn't you just bring me a seatbelt extender or check if this one can be fixed? Are you refusing to comply with safety instructions?" Bryce's voice had taken on an official, threatening tone. "No, but my mother told me to stay in my assigned seat," Jamal explained. "I'd prefer to stay here if we can fix the seatbelt issue." In seat 14A, Judge Hamilton had been observing the escalation with growing concern. He discreetly positioned his phone to record the interaction, making sure to capture both audio and a partial view of the confrontation. "Your defiance is becoming a serious issue," Bryce continued, his voice rising. "This kind of behavior is exactly why we have air marshals on flights." "Air marshals?" Jamal repeated, confused and increasingly frightened. "I'm not being defiant. I'm just trying to follow safety rules with a broken seatbelt." "You're creating a disturbance," Bryce insisted. "If you don't comply immediately, I'll have no choice but to report you to the authorities upon landing. Interfering with a flight crew is a federal offense." The threat of law enforcement sent a wave of fear through Jamal. As a young black man, he'd been warned repeatedly about how quickly encounters with authorities could escalate, regardless of innocence. "Please," Jamal said, his voice finally betraying his anxiety. "I just want to stay in my assigned seat. Could I please speak to the captain or another flight attendant about this issue?" "The captain is busy flying the plane," Bryce snapped. "And I am the head flight attendant on this aircraft." My instructions are final. Judge Hamilton's finger hovered over the call button. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, but he hesitated, knowing from experience that intervening too early might prevent the full extent of the discrimination from being documented. Sometimes justice required allowing injustice to reveal itself fully. It was a calculation he had made countless times in his career, though it never sat easily on his conscience. The elderly woman next to Jamal finally spoke up. "Young man, you can have my seat. My seatbelt works just fine." "That won't be necessary," Bryce interjected before Jamal could respond. "He needs to move to where the flight crew can properly monitor his behavior." "His behavior?" the woman questioned. "All I've seen is a polite young man being treated poorly." "Ma'am, with all due respect, please stay out of this," Bryce replied dismissively. "This is a safety matter." The plane hit another pocket of turbulence, more significant this time. Jamal gripped the armrests, acutely aware of his unsecured status. "I really need a working seatbelt," he said, genuine fear now evident in his voice. "Then you need to follow my instructions and move to the back," Bryce insisted. Jamal found himself in an impossible situation. Follow instructions from his mother and stay put, or follow the increasingly hostile demands of an authority figure who seemed determined to humiliate him. "I'll try the seatbelt one more time," he said, reaching for the ends again. "Maybe if you could show me." "That's it," Bryce interrupted. "I've given you multiple opportunities to comply. I'm documenting this as interference with flight crew duties." As Bryce pulled out a notepad to write down Jamal's seat number and name from the manifest, Judge Hamilton continued recording, his jaw clenched tight with the effort of remaining silent. The situation had progressed from subtle discrimination to overt harassment, and he knew from decades of experience that it was likely to get worse before it got better. The aircraft suddenly lurched as it entered a pocket of stronger turbulence. Overhead bins rattled ominously, and the plane dropped several feet in a heart-stopping moment before stabilizing. Passengers gasped collectively, some reaching for barf bags, others gripping armrests with white knuckles. Bryce, still standing in the aisle by Jamal's row, lost his balance. He stumbled backward, arms windmilling, before catching himself against another seat. The beverage tray he had been holding clattered to the floor, sending plastic cups and ice skittering across the cabin. His face flushed with embarrassment and anger, Bryce immediately fixed his gaze on Jamal. "Look what you made me do," he hissed, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Confusion crossed Jamal's face. "Sir, I was sitting here the whole time. How could I?" "Don't talk back to me," Bryce snapped, bending down to gather the scattered cups. "I've had enough of your attitude. This is exactly the kind of behavior that causes problems on flights." Several passengers had begun recording the confrontation on their phones. Some looked concerned about Bryce's behavior, while others nodded in agreement, having already accepted the narrative that Jamal was somehow causing trouble. "You're one of those troublemakers, aren't you?" Bryce continued, his voice taking on an ugly edge. "Think the rules don't apply to you?" The racial undertone in his comment was unmistakable. A middle-aged white man in a business suit nodded in agreement, while a young woman a few rows back looked increasingly disturbed by Bryce's behavior. The turbulence had splashed some of the spilled drinks onto Jamal's pants. Cold liquid seeped through to his skin, and instinctively, he stood up to avoid the spreading puddle. "Sir, the drinks are." "Sit down immediately," Bryce shouted, his voice echoing through the cabin. "We are experiencing turbulence. But my pants are soaked, and my seatbelt doesn't." "He's becoming aggressive," Bryce announced to the cabin at large. "I need assistance restraining an unruly passenger." The words "restraining" and "unruly" sent a wave of panic through Jamal. He had seen the news stories, had heard the warnings from his mother, knew all too well how quickly situations like this could turn deadly for someone who looked like him. "I'm not being unruly," Jamal protested, his voice cracking slightly. "I'm just trying to avoid the spill." Two white male passengers from across the aisle unbuckled their seatbelts and stood up. "Need help?" one of them asked Bryce, eyeing Jamal suspiciously. "Yes, thank you," Bryce replied. "We need to control this situation before it escalates further." "Control?" Jamal echoed in disbelief. "I haven't done anything wrong." As the men approached, Jamal raised his hands in a universal gesture of surrender, backing up against his seat. "Please, there's no need for this," he pleaded. The elderly woman beside him had begun frantically pressing her own call button. "This isn't right," she insisted. "Someone else needs to come here." In the chaos of the moment, with multiple people standing despite the turbulence, Bryce moved toward Jamal. Whether it was the plane's movement or deliberate action would later be disputed, but what happened next was captured on at least a dozen passenger phones. Bryce's closed fist connected squarely with Jamal's jaw. The sickening crack was audible even over the aircraft's ambient noise. Jamal's head snapped back, his body crumpling into the seat. Blood immediately began trickling from his mouth where his teeth had cut into the inside of his cheek. The cabin erupted in shock. Several passengers screamed. The two men who had stood to help Bryce froze in place, clearly not having expected violence. Jamal, dazed and in excruciating pain, raised a trembling hand to his jaw, his fingers coming away red with blood. Bryce stood over him, fist still clenched. "He tried to attack me," he announced to the shocked cabin. "I had to defend myself." It was at that precise moment that the silver-haired man in seat 14A rose to his full, impressive height. The cabin fell silent as Judge Marcus Hamilton stepped into the aisle, his federal judiciary credentials already in hand. "That boy's jaw is broken," he stated with quiet authority, "and so is your career. What would you do in this situation? Have you ever witnessed discrimination that suddenly escalated to violence? Comment below with your thoughts. Do you think Bryce acted with premeditated intent, or was this a heat-of-the-moment loss of control? Type 1 if you believe this was a calculated act, or 2 if you think it was an impulsive reaction. Have you ever stood up against injustice when others remained silent? Hit that like button if you believe more people need to speak out when they witness discrimination. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories about people standing up against systemic racism. Will Judge Hamilton's intervention be enough to bring justice for Jamal? Let's find out in the next part of this shocking story. The atmosphere in the cabin crystallized into perfect stillness. Judge Marcus Hamilton stood in the aisle, his federal judiciary credentials gleaming under the overhead lights, commanding attention without raising his voice. At 63 years old, his distinguished appearance, tailored charcoal suit, silver hair precisely cut, wire-rimmed glasses, projected an aura of unquestionable authority. "I am Senior Federal Judge Marcus Hamilton, United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit, Civil Rights Division," he announced, his deep voice resonating throughout the suddenly silent cabin. "This young man requires immediate medical attention." Bryce's expression cycled rapidly through shock, defiance, and finally, the dawning realization of serious consequences. "Sir, you don't understand the situation. This passenger was—" "I understand perfectly," Judge Hamilton interrupted. "I've been observing your behavior toward this young man since Detroit. More importantly, I've been recording it for the past 20 minutes. He held up his phone, its red recording light still blinking. "Along with approximately 15 other passengers, from what I can see." Blood continued to drip from Jamal's mouth as he clutched his jaw, tears of pain streaming down his face. The elderly woman beside him had removed a handkerchief from her purse and was gently pressing it against his chin to absorb the blood. "This boy needs a doctor immediately," she insisted, her hands trembling with age and emotion. Judge Hamilton turned to address the two men who had stood to assist Bryce. "Gentlemen, would you please return to your seats? And I'd suggest you consider carefully what you witnessed before making any statements later." As they awkwardly retreated, Judge Hamilton approached Jamal, his stern expression softening with compassion. "Son, try not to move your jaw. Based on the sound and your symptoms, it appears to be broken. I'm going to ensure you receive proper care." Jamal attempted to nod but winced in agony at the slight movement. The judge's mind flashed back to his own youth in Mississippi in the 1970s. He had been Jamal's age when a similar incident occurred, a bus driver who had forced him to stand for the entire 3-hour journey despite empty seats, then accused him of loitering in the aisle. The memory had driven his entire legal career, from Howard University Law School to his appointment to the federal bench. "You," Judge Hamilton pointed at a passenger who appeared to be a medical professional based on the scrubs visible under her jacket, "do you have any medical training that might help us assess his condition?" The woman, a nurse practitioner from Atlanta, immediately moved to Jamal's side. "I need to examine him," she stated professionally, kneeling in the tight space. Meanwhile, Bryce had begun constructing his defense. "Judge or not, you didn't see everything. This passenger was repeatedly disruptive. He refused to follow safety instructions and became physically threatening when I attempted to." "Mr. Reynolds," Judge Hamilton cut him off, reading the name from his badge, "I strongly advise you to stop talking. You've been recorded physically assaulting a minor. Each word you speak now will likely be used against you in multiple proceedings, criminal, civil, and administrative." The precision of the judge's legal language silenced Bryce momentarily. Judge Hamilton continued, "I personally witnessed systematic discrimination, fabrication of safety concerns, and deliberate escalation culminating in violence against a minor. Your actions appear to violate 18 U.S. Code Section 249 regarding hate crimes, not to mention simple assault, child endangerment, and multiple airline regulations." Bryce's face paled. It wasn't like that. He was. Additionally, Judge Hamilton continued relentlessly, "I observed what appears to be a pattern of discriminatory service provision that likely violates Title II of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, specifically regarding public accommodations." Several passengers murmured in agreement, some openly displaying their phones recording the encounter. Others looked confused or uncomfortable, particularly those who had initially sided with Bryce's characterization of Jamal as problematic. The cockpit door opened, and the captain emerged, drawn by the commotion. He was a tall, white man with graying temples and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "What's going on here?" he demanded, taking in the scene, Jamal bleeding, Judge Hamilton standing protectively near him, Bryce looking increasingly cornered. "Captain," Bryce immediately appealed, "we have an unruly passenger situation that I was handling according to protocol when this gentleman interfered." The captain's gaze darted between them, naturally inclined to trust his crew member. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to return to your seat." "My flight attendant." "Captain," Judge Hamilton interrupted, his tone firm but measured, "your flight attendant has just committed assault against a minor. I am a federal judge who witnessed the entire incident, as did numerous passengers who have video evidence." He gestured around the cabin where at least a dozen phones were visible, recording. "Would you like to review the evidence before continuing to defend his actions?" The captain hesitated, suddenly uncertain. Judge Hamilton seized the moment to display his own recording, showing the incident in clear detail, Bryce's aggression, Jamal's defensive posture, and the unmistakable punch. The captain's expression darkened as he watched. "Mr. Reynolds, step back immediately," he ordered. Turning to Judge Hamilton, his tone shifted from authoritative to concerned. "Judge, what do you recommend we do? This young man needs immediate medical attention that can't be provided in the air. I believe the safety and welfare of a minor passenger constitutes grounds for emergency landing at the nearest suitable airport." The captain nodded grimly. "I'll contact air traffic control." He turned to go back to the cockpit, then paused. "Mr. Reynolds, return to the galley and stay there until further notice." Bryce attempted one last defense. "Captain, this will cost the airline thousands of dollars." "I don't think." "That's enough," the captain cut him off sharply. "This situation has escalated far beyond your authority. Judge, which airport would you suggest?" "We appear to be over North Carolina," Judge Hamilton replied. "Charlotte Douglas International would be the logical choice. They have excellent medical facilities nearby. As the captain returned to the cockpit, Judge Hamilton turned his attention back to Jamal, who was being examined by the nurse practitioner. Definite mandibular fracture, she confirmed quietly. He needs orthopedic evaluation as soon as possible. There's risk of airway compromise if swelling increases. Judge Hamilton nodded gravely. Hold on, son, he told Jamal. Help is coming. He then addressed the cabin at large. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption to your travel plans. However, I believe we can all agree that the health and safety of this young man must take priority. Most passengers nodded in agreement. A few pulled out their phones to adjust their connecting flights or notify people meeting them in Atlanta about the delay. The overhead speaker crackled to life with the captain's voice. Ladies and gentlemen, due to a medical emergency, we will be making an unscheduled landing at Charlotte Douglas International Airport in approximately 20 minutes. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for landing. Judge Hamilton returned to his seat to buckle up, but not before ensuring that the nurse practitioner remained with Jamal and that another passenger with a functional seatbelt had switched places with him. As the plane began its descent, Hamilton made several quick phone calls, first to the U.S. Marshal's office in Charlotte, then to a colleague at the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, and finally to the airline's general counsel, whom he knew personally from a previous case. The pieces were already falling into place for what would become one of the most significant civil rights cases in recent aviation history, all because a federal judge happened to be in seat 14A on what should have been a routine flight from Detroit to Atlanta. The wheels of the aircraft touched down on the runway at Charlotte Douglas International Airport with a squeal of rubber against concrete. The pilot's voice, tense but professional, came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we have landed safely in Charlotte. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until we reach the gate. Medical personnel will be boarding immediately to attend to our emergency. True to his word, within moments of the aircraft reaching the gate, the cabin door was opened, and a team of emergency medical technicians rushed aboard, equipment in hand. Judge Hamilton stood to direct them toward Jamal, who remained slumped in his seat, a blood-soaked handkerchief pressed against his jaw, his eyes glassy with pain. Mandibular fracture, possible concussion, the nurse practitioner who had been attending him reported efficiently to the EMTs. The injury occurred approximately 25 minutes ago due to a direct blow to the jaw. As the medical team carefully assessed Jamal and prepared him for transport, 2 uniformed Charlotte Mecklenburg police officers boarded the plane. Their expressions were neutral but alert as they surveyed the scene. The lead officer, a stocky man with a close-cropped haircut, immediately approached Bryce, who had emerged from the galley. "Officers, thank you for responding quickly," Bryce began, relief evident in his voice. "We had an incident with an unruly passenger who—" "Actually, officers," Judge Hamilton interrupted, stepping forward with his credentials, "I'm Senior Federal Judge Marcus Hamilton. The unruly passenger is a 15-year-old boy who was assaulted by this flight attendant. The assault is documented on video by multiple passengers, including myself." The officers exchanged glances, their attention shifting from Bryce to Jamal, who was now being carefully transferred to a stretcher. "The young man is the victim here," Judge Hamilton continued firmly. "Mr. Reynolds should be the focus of your investigation." The lead officer nodded, but his partner had already started moving toward Jamal, hand resting on his holster in a manner that sent a chill through Judge Hamilton. He had seen this scenario play out too many times in his career, black victims automatically treated as suspects. "Officer," Hamilton called out sharply, "that boy is a minor who has suffered a serious injury and requires immediate medical attention. There is no need for police intervention with him." The second officer hesitated, then slowly moved his hand away from his weapon. "We need statements from everyone involved," he said defensively. "You'll get them," Judge Hamilton assured him, "but the medical needs of a minor take precedence. I suggest you focus your initial investigation on the numerous witnesses who captured the incident on video, and on Mr. Reynolds, who committed the assault." The lead officer, assessing the situation more carefully now, motioned for his partner to step back from the stretcher. "Judge Hamilton, we'll need your statement as well." Of course, Hamilton agreed. But first, I'm accompanying this young man to the hospital. His mother is in Detroit, and he currently has no guardian present. As the EMTs carefully maneuvered the stretcher through the narrow aisle, passengers moved aside, many filming the proceedings on their phones. Judge Hamilton followed closely, maintaining visual contact with Jamal while simultaneously making a call on his phone. Sandra, he spoke to his judicial assistant, contact Detroit Metro Police. We need to locate Keisha Washington immediately. Her son has been injured on Flight 1382 to Atlanta and is being transported to. He quickly confirmed the destination with the lead EMT, Atrium Health Carolina's medical center in Charlotte. Just as they reached the aircraft door, a man in a crisp suit hurried up the jet bridge, flanked by two airline representatives. The embroidered logo on his lapel identified him as part of the airline's management team. Judge Hamilton, he inquired, slightly out of breath. I'm Trevor Collins, Regional Director for Customer Relations. We've just been informed of the incident and want to assure you that we're taking this matter very seriously. Mr. Collins, I'm accompanying this young man to the hospital, Hamilton replied briskly. Your assurances can wait. What this child needs now is medical attention, not corporate damage control. Collins persisted, stepping partially into their path. Sir, if we could just have a moment in private to discuss. Move aside, Hamilton commanded with such authority that Collins automatically complied. Any discussions will occur after this minor receives proper medical care, with his legal guardian present, and with proper legal representation for all parties involved. Is that clear? Yes, but... Furthermore, Hamilton continued as they moved past, I strongly suggest you secure all relevant evidence immediately, including the aircraft's security footage, passenger recordings, and Mr. Reynolds' personnel file. A preservation order will likely be issued within the hour. As they exited into the terminal, a crowd had already gathered, some filming with their phones. News of the incident had spread rapidly through social media, and local journalists were beginning to arrive. Judge, one of the EMTs urged, we need to transport now. Hamilton nodded and continued walking alongside the stretcher toward the waiting ambulance, deliberately positioning himself to shield Jamal from the growing number of cameras. Inside the ambulance, Jamal's eyes fluttered open, filled with fear and confusion. He attempted to speak but winced in pain. Don't try to talk, son, Hamilton advised gently. Your jaw is likely broken. You're going to the hospital. I've contacted your mother, and she'll be here as soon as possible. Until then, I'll stay with you. Tears welled in Jamal's eyes, tears of pain, fear, and relief that someone was finally advocating for him. As the ambulance doors closed and the vehicle pulled away with sirens wailing, Judge Hamilton's phone rang. It was the airline's chief executive officer calling personally. Judge Hamilton, the CEO began without preamble, I've just been briefed on the situation. I want to express our deepest regrets and assure you that we are prepared to offer generous compensation to the family along with our sincere apologies. We have a standard non-disclosure agreement ready and can wire funds immediately if... Mr. Pearson, Hamilton interrupted coldly, a minor has suffered a broken jaw at the hands of your employee in what appears to be a racially motivated assault. This isn't a customer service issue to be resolved with hush money and an NDA. This is a civil rights violation, assault on a minor, and potentially a hate crime. I understand your concern, the CEO continued smoothly, but surely we can resolve this without unnecessary public attention that benefits no one. The amount we're prepared to offer is quite substantial. I'm going to stop you right there, Hamilton replied, his voice hardening. Any further attempts to negotiate a settlement before the family has legal representation could constitute witness tampering and obstruction of justice. I suggest you consult with your legal team about the applicable federal statutes before making any more calls. He ended the call as the ambulance pulled up to the emergency department entrance, where a team of medical professionals was already waiting. Within minutes, Jamal was whisked inside for X-rays and evaluation by an oral surgeon. Judge Hamilton took a moment in the waiting room to make another series of calls, first to his network of civil rights attorneys in Charlotte, then to his former clerk who now specialized in aviation law, and finally to the Department of Justice to request a formal investigation into the airline's practices. By the time he finished his calls, the waiting room had filled with reporters clamoring for information. Hamilton ignored them, focusing instead on the doctor who had emerged from the treatment area. "Judge Hamilton," the surgeon addressed him. "The X-rays confirm a displaced fracture of the mandible. He'll need surgery to wire his jaw shut for healing. We're preparing him now." Hamilton nodded grimly. "Thank you, doctor. His mother should be arriving within a few hours. Please proceed with whatever treatment is necessary for his well-being." As the doctor returned to the surgical area, Hamilton's phone buzzed with a notification. The incident was already trending on social media, with hashtags like #JusticeForJamal and #FlyingWhileBlack gaining traction. Several videos from different passenger angles had been uploaded, leaving no doubt about what had transpired. The airline's representatives arrived at the hospital minutes later, armed with settlement papers and checkbook, only to find themselves face-to-face with not only Judge Hamilton but also 3 prominent civil rights attorneys who had responded to his call. Their attempt at a quick, quiet resolution had been thoroughly preempted by a man who had spent his career ensuring that justice wasn't just available to those who could afford it, but to everyone who deserved it. The fluorescent lights of the surgical waiting room cast harsh shadows across Judge Hamilton's face as he maintained his vigil. 5 hours had passed since Jamal was wheeled into surgery. The procedure to wire his jaw shut had been complicated by the severity of the fracture and concerns about potential nerve damage. As a man accustomed to the measured pace of legal proceedings, Hamilton found the medical waiting game particularly challenging. His attention was drawn to a commotion at the entrance. A woman in scrubs, clearly having come directly from work, burst through the doors, her eyes wild with panic and fury. "Where is my son?" she demanded at the reception desk. "Jamal Washington. I'm his mother, Keisha Washington." Judge Hamilton approached her immediately. "Ms. Washington. I'm Judge Marcus Hamilton. I was on the flight with Jamal." Keisha's eyes narrowed, her body language cautious and defensive. Years of dealing with authority figures who rarely had her family's best interests at heart had taught her suspicion as a survival skill. "Where is my baby? What happened to him? They told me his jaw was broken on a plane." Hamilton gestured toward the chairs in a quiet corner. "He's in surgery right now. The doctors say it's going well, but they needed to wire his jaw shut to allow proper healing." "Surgery?" Keisha's voice cracked. "How did this happen?" "He was just flying to visit his grandmother." Carefully, Judge Hamilton recounted the events on the plane, showing her portions of the video he had recorded. Keisha's expression transformed from confusion to horror to rage as the truth of what had happened to her son became clear. "That man struck my child," she whispered, her hands trembling. "Because his seatbelt was broken?" "Ms. Washington, what happened to Jamal was inexcusable. It appears to have been racially motivated discrimination that escalated to violence." Hamilton's tone was professional but compassionate. "I want you to know that I've already contacted several colleagues who specialize in civil rights law. They're prepared to represent you and Jamal pro bono if you wish." Keisha stared at him, suspicious of unexpected allies after years of fighting systems alone. "Why would you do that? You don't know us." Hamilton's expression softened slightly. "Because 30 years ago, I was Jamal." He briefly shared his own experience as a young man facing discrimination, how it had shaped his career choice and commitment to justice. As he spoke, Keisha began to understand that she had found not just an ally, but someone who truly comprehended the weight her son carried simply by existing in his skin. As their conversation continued, Keisha shared glimpses of Jamal's life, his academic achievements, his dream of becoming a lawyer, the loss of his father to police violence when Jamal was just 8 years old. How she had worked double shifts as a nurse to provide opportunities for her son. How carefully she had taught him to navigate a world that often viewed him as a threat rather than a child. He's a good boy, she said, wiping away tears. Always has been. Respectful, studious, careful. I taught him everything I could about staying safe, but it wasn't enough, was it? Before Hamilton could respond, a surgeon in green scrubs approached them. Ms. Washington. I'm Dr. Patel. Jamal's surgery was successful. We've stabilized the fracture with titanium plates and wired his jaw shut to ensure proper healing. Can I see him? Keisha asked immediately. He's in recovery now. You can see him in about 20 minutes when he's transferred to a room. He'll be groggy from the anesthesia, Dr. Patel explained. He won't be able to speak, of course, and will be on a liquid diet for the next 6 to 8 weeks. We're also monitoring for signs of concussion. As Dr. Patel walked away, the hospital corridor suddenly filled with activity. A team of suited individuals approached, led by a polished woman with a corporate smile. Ms. Washington. I'm Jennifer Morales, Vice President of Customer Relations for the airline. First, let me express our deepest regrets about this unfortunate incident involving your son. Keisha straightened, her nurse's instincts immediately recognizing the choreographed nature of this spontaneous visit. Morales continued smoothly, we want to assure you that the employee in question has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The airline takes these matters very seriously. She opened a leather portfolio. We'd like to offer immediate assistance in the form of compensation for your son's medical expenses, pain and suffering, and any inconvenience caused. Our initial offer is $500,000. Judge Hamilton noticed how Morales emphasized the amount, clearly hoping for wide-eyed acceptance from someone she assumed would be dazzled by such a figure. Of course, Morales added, producing documents from her portfolio, we would need you to sign this standard release form and confidentiality agreement. Keisha glanced at the thick document, then at Hamilton, who gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. 500,000, Keisha repeated slowly. For my son's broken jaw, public humiliation, and trauma. It's a very generous initial offer, Morales assured her. We could have the funds wired to your account by tomorrow morning. Keisha thought about Jamal's college fund, which despite her careful saving, remained woefully inadequate for his Ivy League ambitions. The amount offered could secure his educational future, free from student loans. The temptation was palpable. Ms. Washington, Hamilton interjected gently, I believe you should review these documents with proper legal counsel before making any decisions. Morales' smile tightened. Judge Hamilton, while we appreciate your concern, this is a private matter between our airline and the Washington family. It ceased being a private matter, Hamilton replied, when your employee assaulted a minor in front of a plane full of witnesses, resulting in injuries requiring surgical intervention. He turned to Keisha. What happened to Jamal isn't just a customer service issue to be resolved with a check. It's part of a pattern that affects countless individuals who don't happen to have a federal judge witnessing their mistreatment. Keisha looked between them, her practical nature warring with her sense of justice. The money would help with Jamal's college, she admitted. Ms. Washington, Hamilton said carefully, my colleagues and I believe the eventual settlement or judgment could be substantially higher. More importantly, a confidential settlement would allow the airline to avoid implementing meaningful changes to prevent this from happening to other children. Morales' professional demeanor slipped slightly. Judge Hamilton, I must object to your interference in our attempt to make this right for the family. Making it right, Hamilton countered, would involve systemic changes to your hiring, training, and accountability processes. It would involve transparent acknowledgement of what occurred rather than buried secrets behind NDAs. It would ensure that the next black child boarding your aircraft doesn't experience what Jamal did. A nurse appeared at that moment. Ms. Washington. Your son is asking for you. Keisha stood immediately, turning to Morales. I need to see my child. I'll consider your offer and consult with attorneys. As Keisha followed the nurse, Hamilton addressed Morales. I suggest you prepare your legal team for discovery. Based on my observations today, I suspect this isn't an isolated incident but rather indicative of institutional issues that discovery will reveal." Morales' composed expression faltered momentarily before she recovered. "Judge Hamilton, perhaps you and I could discuss this privately. I'm sure we can find a resolution that satisfies everyone's concerns without protracted legal proceedings." "Ms. Morales," Hamilton replied, gathering his belongings to follow Keisha, "in my 30 years on the bench, I've learned that justice rarely emerges from private conversations in hallways. It requires the disinfectant of sunlight and the scrutiny of transparent proceedings." As he walked away, his phone buzzed with news alerts. The story had exploded across social media and was now being picked up by national news networks. Videos from multiple passengers showed the incident from various angles, leaving no doubt about what had transpired. Within hours, two narrative hashtags were trending, #JusticeForJamal and #StandWithBryce. The latter had emerged after Bryce Reynolds gave an interview claiming he had felt threatened by the large, aggressive teenager, who had repeatedly refused to comply with safety instructions. The battle lines were being drawn, not just for a legal proceeding, but for yet another national conversation about how black bodies, especially young black male bodies, were perceived and treated in America. And at the center of it all was a 15-year-old honor student who had simply wanted to visit his grandmother in Atlanta. 1 month after the incident, Jamal Washington sat in the conference room of Patterson, Greer and Hamilton, the prestigious civil rights law firm that had taken his case. His jaw remained wired shut, the titanium plates holding together what Bryce Reynolds' fist had broken. Communication came through a small whiteboard where he wrote brief responses, or through the text-to-speech app on his phone when more elaborate expression was necessary. The physical pain had subsided somewhat, but other wounds remained raw. His academic standing, once impeccable, had slipped as he struggled to participate in classes without the ability to speak. The debate team championship he had been positioned to lead had proceeded without him. His social circle had contracted as the difficulty of communication made casual interaction exhausting. Across the large mahogany table sat his mother Keisha, Judge Hamilton, now serving as co-counsel rather than jurist, and a team of attorneys preparing for the day's deposition. The case, Washington versus National Airways, had expanded far beyond the initial assault to include claims of systematic discrimination, negligent hiring and retention, and violation of federal civil rights protections in public accommodations. "Jamal, are you ready?" asked Serena Patterson, the lead attorney and founding partner of the firm. "The airline's legal team will be aggressive. They'll try to paint a picture of you as problematic, non-compliant, perhaps even threatening." Jamal nodded, then wrote on his whiteboard, "I'm ready." The past month had been a crash course in legal strategy and media management. The airline had launched a subtle but persistent campaign to shift the narrative, leaking Jamal's school disciplinary record, which contained exactly one infraction, tardiness, and emphasizing Bryce Reynolds' exemplary 15-year service record. What they hadn't anticipated was Judge Hamilton's methodical approach to discovery. Having spent decades presiding over similar cases, he knew exactly where to look and what to demand. The results had been damning. "Before we begin," Hamilton addressed the room, "I want to review what discovery has yielded so far." He opened a folder containing printouts of internal airline emails, HR complaints, and passenger feedback reports spanning a decade. Reynolds has 17 previous complaints of discriminatory treatment filed against him, all by passengers of color, all systematically downgraded in importance and eventually dismissed without action. Keisha's expression hardened as Hamilton continued. "More concerning is this internal memo from 3 years ago discussing what they euphemistically termed passenger profiling for enhanced security monitoring. The directive specifically instructed flight attendants to apply additional scrutiny to young men of color traveling alone. How is that even legal?" Keisha asked, her voice tight with controlled anger. "It isn't," Serena confirmed. "It violates multiple federal statutes. The airline will claim it was an unauthorized draft that was never implemented, but we found evidence of its application in crew briefing notes and performance evaluations." The conference room door opened, and a paralegal entered. "They're ready for us in the deposition room." As they gathered their materials, Judge Hamilton placed a supportive hand on Jamal's shoulder. "Remember, just answer truthfully. Don't let them provoke an emotional response." Jamal nodded, his expression serious beyond his 15 years. The deposition room was sterile and tense, with the airline's legal team, 5 attorneys from one of the nation's top corporate defense firms, arranged on one side of the table. Leading them was William Schaefer, known in legal circles as the Bulldog for his aggressive deposition techniques. "Good morning," Schaefer greeted them with professional courtesy that didn't reach his eyes. "Let's begin." For the next 4 hours, Schaefer attempted to construct an alternative narrative of the events on the plane. He questioned Jamal's history of compliance with authority figures, his attitude toward Bryce Reynolds, whether he had been deliberately provocative by repeatedly pressing the call button. Jamal, limited to typed or written responses, maintained a composure that belied his age. When asked if he had raised his voice to Reynolds, he simply typed, "With a properly functioning seatbelt, this interaction would never have occurred." By mid-afternoon, Schaefer's frustration became evident as his carefully constructed narrative failed to materialize. During a brief recess, he approached Serena with a revised settlement offer. $1 million, confidential resolution, no admission of liability, he proposed quietly. "This is the best offer your client will receive." Serena glanced at Keisha, who had overheard. The amount was significant, enough to secure Jamal's entire educational future through law school and beyond, enough to allow Keisha to reduce her punishing work schedule, enough to provide a measure of financial security they had never known. But Keisha's expression remained resolute. Over the past month, she had witnessed not just her son's physical pain but also the psychological toll of being viewed as a threat rather than a child. She had read hundreds of messages from other families sharing similar experiences that hadn't happened to have a federal judge witnessing them. "No," she said simply. "Not about the money anymore." Schaefer's professional mask slipped momentarily. "Ms. Washington, I understand you're upset, but be reasonable. A trial means public exposure for your son, aggressive questioning, media scrutiny of your entire life. The outcome is never certain. This offer guarantees financial security." Judge Hamilton, who had been observing silently, finally spoke. "Mr. Schaefer, having spent 3 decades on the bench, I can assure you that what you're witnessing is the very definition of reasonableness. Ms. Washington is looking beyond immediate financial gain to the broader implications of this case." Serena added, "We'll be proceeding with the next phase of depositions. I believe we have Bryce Reynolds scheduled for tomorrow." Schaefer's jaw tightened. Reynolds is no longer employed by the airline. His deposition may be difficult to arrange. "Interesting," Hamilton remarked. "Our subpoena was served last week. His sudden departure won't affect his legal obligation to appear." As they prepared to resume the deposition, Jamal's phone buzzed with a news alert. National media outlets were reporting that passenger videos of the incident had surpassed 50 million views across platforms. Public opinion had begun to shift decisively in Jamal's favor as more context emerged through the legal proceedings. The airline's stock had dropped 12% since the incident, and a boycott organized by civil rights organizations was gaining momentum. Corporate clients had begun requesting assurances about diversity and anti-bias training before booking group travel. Just as they were about to re-enter the deposition room, Serena's assistant rushed in with breaking news. An elderly white couple, the same passengers who had been seated next to Jamal on the flight, had come forward with their own video evidence and a sworn statement contradicting Bryce Reynolds' version of events in every particular. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitaker," the assistant explained, reading from her notes. "They say they initially hesitated to come forward due to their age and health concerns, but couldn't in good conscience remain silent after seeing Reynolds' public statements. For the first time since the incident, a smile tried to form on Jamal's face, though the wires prevented full expression. He wrote on his whiteboard, "Truth always finds a way." The afternoon deposition session proceeded with renewed energy from Jamal's legal team. As Schaefer continued his questioning, the ground beneath his carefully constructed defense was crumbling. By day's end, it was clear that the airline's aggressive strategy had backfired spectacularly. As they packed up their materials, Keisha received a text from her mother in Atlanta: "Baby, you stand firm. This isn't just about Jamal anymore. It's about every child who looks like him who's ever been made to feel less than human when all they were doing was existing in their skin." Keisha showed the message to Jamal, whose eyes filled with tears of recognition. This was why they were enduring the pain and exposure of a public legal battle. Not for money, not for vengeance, but for the simple recognition that the dignity of a black child was non-negotiable. As they left the law offices, a small group of supporters had gathered outside with signs reading, "Justice for Jamal," and "Black children deserve dignity." Among them was a group of teenagers from Jamal's debate team, who had organized a silent demonstration in solidarity. Jamal straightened his shoulders and raised his hand in acknowledgement, his expression conveying what his wired jaw could not. This fight was far from over, but for perhaps the first time, he wasn't fighting alone. 3 years later, on a crisp autumn morning, Jamal Washington straightened his tie in the mirror of his Cambridge apartment. The reflection that gazed back at him bore little resemblance to the traumatized 15-year-old whose jaw had been shattered on a routine flight. Now 18 and a first-year student at Harvard Law School, Jamal carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced the worst of humanity and emerged not just intact, but transformed. His phone buzzed with an incoming video call from Judge Marcus Hamilton, now retired from the bench but still very much active in civil rights advocacy. "Ready for your first day, counselor?" Hamilton greeted him with the warm formality that had characterized their relationship since that fateful flight. "As ready as I'll ever be," Jamal replied, his speech clear and strong, though a faint scar on his jawline remained as a permanent reminder of the past. "Though I'm not a counselor yet, Judge. Just a 1L with a lot to learn." "You've already learned more about the law in action than most of your classmates," Hamilton reminded him. "How's the foundation work coming along?" The Jamal Washington Foundation for Justice had been established using a portion of the eventual settlement from the airline lawsuit. After 2 years of increasingly damaging revelations during discovery, including the uncovering of systematic racial profiling policies that violated federal law, National Airways had finally capitulated. The final settlement, $22 million and a legally binding consent decree requiring comprehensive reforms, had been unprecedented in its scope. Most significant among the mandated changes was the Washington Protocol, a comprehensive anti-bias training program that had since been adopted by 3 other major airlines. Every National Airways employee now underwent mandatory training named after the teenager whose dignity they had violated. "We just awarded our first 5 scholarships," Jamal reported with pride. "All going to black students interested in civil rights law. One of them reminds me so much of myself 3 years ago, brilliant debater, straight-A student, never traveled on a plane because his family couldn't afford it." Hamilton nodded approvingly. "Your grandmother would be proud." The mention of his grandmother brought a bittersweet smile to Jamal's face. She had passed away 6 months earlier, but not before seeing justice served in her grandson's case. More importantly, she had lived to see him heal, graduate as valedictorian, and accept his Harvard admission. "I've been thinking about her a lot today," Jamal admitted. "She always said that true change doesn't happen in courtrooms but in what comes after." A notification appeared on Jamal's phone. His Uber had arrived to take him to campus for the orientation. "I should go, Judge. I'll call you later this week to let you know how it went." "One more thing," Hamilton said before ending the call. "Remember what we talked about. Your story is powerful, but it doesn't define you. You're not there as the kid from the airplane case. You're there as Jamal Washington, future attorney, on your own merits." "I know," Jamal assured him. "Though I'm still giving that guest lecture in Professor Dalton's civil rights litigation class next month." They both laughed, and Jamal ended the call, gathering his backpack. As he left his apartment, he checked his watch, plenty of time to stop for coffee before heading to campus. The coffee shop near Harvard Square was crowded with students, many looking as nervous and excited as Jamal felt. As he waited in line, he couldn't help overhearing 2 older students discussing a case. Washington versus National Airways, one was saying. Complete game changer for civil rights litigation in transportation. We're covering it in advanced civil procedure this semester. Wasn't that the kid whose jaw got broken by a flight attendant? The other asked. Yeah, but the case went way beyond that. The discovery process uncovered decades of institutional racism. The Washington Protocol is now considered the gold standard for anti-bias training in the transportation sector. Jamal smiled to himself but said nothing as he ordered his coffee. His name, both personal and in legal precedent, had taken on a life of its own. 2 hours later, seated in Harvard Law School's historic Langham Hall for the dean's welcome address, Jamal found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. The physical recovery had been the easiest part, 6 weeks with his jaw wired shut, months of speech therapy afterward. The psychological healing had taken longer, working through the trauma, the anger, the fear. The legal battle had been exhausting, depositions, hearings, the constant media attention, the hate mail from those who sided with Reynolds, the uncomfortable spotlight of becoming a reluctant symbol in America's ongoing racial reckoning. There had been moments when Jamal had questioned whether it was worth it, whether he and his mother should have simply taken the initial settlement and retreated into private life. But then had come the letters, thousands of them, from black parents and children sharing similar experiences, thanking him for standing his ground. From flight attendants of color who spoke of the discrimination they'd faced within the industry. From allies who had witnessed such incidents but had remained silent, promising to do better. The dean's voice interrupted his thoughts, and we are particularly proud to welcome a student whose courage in the face of injustice has already changed American jurisprudence before even beginning his legal education. Though he has asked to be treated as just another first-year student, I would be remiss not to acknowledge the presence of Jamal Washington, whose landmark case many of you will study during your time here. A ripple of recognition passed through the auditorium, and Jamal felt hundreds of eyes turn toward him. He acknowledged the moment with a slight nod, then refocused on the dean's continuing remarks. After the orientation concluded, Jamal made his way to the campus bookstore to purchase his textbooks. As he waited in the checkout line, his phone buzzed with a notification. His flight to Detroit for Thanksgiving break had been confirmed. For the first time since the incident, Jamal would be boarding a plane. He had chosen National Airways deliberately, wanting to see firsthand whether the changes mandated by the settlement had made any real difference. 3 months later, Jamal stood in the boarding area at Boston Logan Airport, his heart racing despite his outward composure. His therapist had prepared him for potential triggers, the sounds, smells, and procedures that might reawaken traumatic memories. But Jamal was determined to face this milestone head-on. Now boarding our first-class and priority passengers for National Airways Flight 772 to Detroit, the gate agent announced. As a part of the settlement, Jamal had received lifetime first-class privileges on the airline, though he rarely discussed this particular detail. He approached the gate, boarding pass in hand. "Good afternoon, Mr. Washington," the gate agent greeted him, checking his identification. "Thank you for flying with us today." Jamal nodded and proceeded down the jet bridge, taking deliberate deep breaths as he approached the aircraft door. The lead flight attendant, a black woman in her 40s, greeted him at the entrance. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Washington," she said, her recognition of him evident but professionally understated. "I'm Sandra, your lead flight attendant today. It's an honor to have you with us." As Jamal settled into his first-class seat, he noticed the Washington Protocol card visibly displayed in the seat pocket, a reminder of anti-bias policies now mandated for all crew members. The flight attendants moved through the cabin with consistent professionalism toward all passengers, regardless of appearance or seating class. When the plane reached cruising altitude, Sandra approached his seat. "Mr. Washington, this is somewhat unusual, but our captain would like to speak with you after we land, if you're comfortable with that." Jamal raised an eyebrow but nodded his agreement. 3 hours later, as passengers disembarked in Detroit, Sandra escorted Jamal to the cockpit where a black man in his 50s waited. "Captain Michael Johnson," he introduced himself, extending his hand. "I wanted to thank you personally." I've been flying for 27 years, and until your case forced changes in company policy, I was still routinely questioned about my credentials by passengers and occasionally by my own crew. The captain continued, the Washington Protocol training has made a tangible difference in our corporate culture. It's not perfect, change never is, but it's a beginning. You've altered the trajectory of this industry in ways that will benefit generations of passengers and employees. As Jamal exited the airport where his mother waited to take him home for the holidays, he reflected on his grandmother's wisdom. True change doesn't happen in courtrooms but in what comes after. A broken jaw had nearly shattered his dreams, but in the reconstruction had come something stronger, a purpose that extended beyond personal ambition to the pursuit of systemic justice. In seat 14A of that Detroit to Atlanta flight 3 years ago, a federal judge had witnessed what too often went unseen. But the greater victory lay in all that had followed, in protocols changed, in scholarships funded, in a first-year law student determined to ensure that the arc of the moral universe continued its long bend toward justice, one case at a time. This story illuminates the harsh reality that discrimination doesn't just happen in history books, it occurs daily in ordinary settings like airplanes, schools, and workplaces. Jamal's experience demonstrates how quickly prejudice can escalate from microaggressions to physical violence when left unchecked. But more importantly, it shows the power of bearing witness. Judge Hamilton's presence changed everything not because he was special, but because he refused to look away. True justice requires both individual courage and systemic change. One without the other is insufficient. Jamal's broken jaw became the catalyst for transforming airline policies, creating scholarships, and inspiring a new generation of civil rights advocates. His story reminds us that the path to justice is rarely quick or easy, but the ripple effects of standing firm against discrimination extend far beyond any single incident. The Washington Protocol now serves as a model precisely because it acknowledges that racism isn't solved through quick settlements and NDAs, but through transparent accountability and institutional reform. When we recognize each other's full humanity, regardless of skin color, we all move closer to the society we claim to believe in. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wondered if you should speak up? What held you back, or gave you courage? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story moved you to reflect on your own role in creating a more just society, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful racism stories that challenge and inspire. Did you know a single voice can spark massive change? Share this video with someone who needs to hear that standing against injustice matters, even when it's difficult. Thank you for being part of this important conversation. May we all find the courage to be the Judge Hamilton in someone else's moment of need. Until next time, remember that justice requires both witnesses and advocates.